Good afternoon, everyone. Welcome back to the channel. Today we have the honor to have Christine O'Donnell again. If you watch our channel, you know that every month and a half, 2 months, we will invite Christine to our show to talk about different topics in art, like how to price your art, how to approach an art gallery. And today we are talking about
Artivism, yes.
exactly. So let's maybe start with the basics. Maybe some artists have never heard about this term, artivism, what it is.
Artivism is what's called a portmanteau word, meaning that it's made up of two other words, art and activism. What it is art that it has an activist aspect to what's happening in the art. Instead of art for art's sake, which is what a lot of art is as well, or let's say process art, which is the art is in the making. This is art that has a message behind it where social impact is a vast part of that message. I would say it often comes out of the makers a sense of their own persecution in a way that they are experiencing something that needs to be shared. They have a group that needs to be rallied together, whether it be the people of Iran, the Black Lives Matter movement, women and feminism, or any other group, the Chicano movement. There are tons and tons of different angles that one can take, and tons of different groups that are in this artivism and social activism art movement.
So I asked ChatGPT 4 what is artivism with 2 lines, and Chat told me artivism is a form of activism that utilizes creative expression, such as art, music, theater, to advocate for social or political change. So you think it's a quite a well-rounded explanation?
I think that that essentially sums it up. I think that like my little brainwave was about this idea that you're probably not going to get a lot of art activism from people who don't feel marginalized. ChatGPT is given that to us in their succinct manner. So
I want to use the answer from chat because I got different answers from everybody. And I want to share with you a personal story. One day I was sitting down for coffee with an artist friend of a friend. So I didn't really know her. So she asked me for my help to, help her come up with a discourse for her marketing campaign to tell her story. And she is making this feminine figures, and she was talking about feminine lives and the history of women and her own like personal history and also the ones of her country from Latin America. So I asked her like, are you an artivist or feminist, for example? And she's like, yeah, I'm feminist. I'm like, what is your belief in feminism? She's like, I believe everybody, like every woman, should be the most feminine possible.
oh,
And I was like, oh, exactly. I was like, oh, I had no idea how to react. So I was like, okay, like, then what is the message? The message was every woman is beautiful. I'm like, yeah, no, but you can't say life is beautiful. That's not a message. But many people think that is okay. That is a message. It's a positive message. What do you think?
in terms of like many people think that's okay, I think that's like a bit vague. Like, of course it's okay. Like, and people can make whatever kind of art they want. The problem is that we can't gatekeep artivism and being an artist, and even the idea of feminism. All of these topics, like, there's no one arbiter of them. You and I can't decide what any of these topics are, and you and her, and like no one has like the last word or say on them. And that's what's one of the important things to understand. So for all of those who are watching, just know that these are our opinions, and you can choose to agree or disagree, and that's totally fine. But I agree that like the standard concepts that we have for feminism is probably not that idea of everyone should be as feminine as possible, let's say. But also, it doesn't, like, that idea that everyone is beautiful is a nice idea. and a positive idea, but like what is being gains from transmitting that message, right? And does that make someone an art activist? I think that there could be more. You could push it further. And where do you draw? I think this was one of the things that thinking about this topic was where do you draw the line that takes someone from art with a message into the realm of activism and artivism? There are so many people with a message out there, and in a way, like a social impact message, but we can't call everyone an artivist or an art activist. It has to be that, like, you as a person, you as an artist, take your message outside of your art, that it's also what you are doing with your art, how you're showing it, where you're showing it, what you're talking about in your artist statement, what you're doing with it and leveraging it, not just maybe showing it at a gallery and trying to sell it, but like how you're trying to bring this message to others that really may separate people who have that message. And this is today, I'm not talking about in the past, from someone with like a social impact work. What do you think about that?
So I'm going to be the devil's advocate here because if we both, let's say, on the same side, there's no debate, it's not as
Sure, go
spicy and
for it.
interesting. So I was having this monthly talk with the patrons in our community. So we have a patron, and every month we organize some sort of informal community talk where we chat about different things, touch up, and asking each other some questions. And sometimes I would get some feedback. And one of the lady in the community mentioned that in her region, in California, there is this a special government fund to help artists get politically active. And there's a list of themes that you can talk about to get the funds. For example, desertification, the dry
Okay.
out,
Yeah.
COVID resilience, vaccination and well-being, and a list of things. But my first reaction was, wait a second, that's not really artivism. That's domestication, totally. Because if a government is saying, oh, do this, please, that's not activism. You know what I mean? It has to be against the regime.
I'm not sure if it has to be against the regime in the United
Oh,
States.
sorry, the narrative, the narrative.
I immediately, yes, bristle at the idea that a government is getting involved. I would say that starts to get into the realm of propaganda, frankly. If a government is telling you, like, hey, will you put out these messages about this? That's like, yeah. And it is like, where's the line? If a government is telling you to make art about this topic and paying you to do it, how is that not propaganda, right? It is skirting that line a little bit. I mean, I still think that we need art that is bringing awareness to certain topics, such as desertification and desertification. I don't know how I'm probably saying that word wrong, but like the environment, let's say.
Yeah.
The danger there is we're so divided in the United States that those topics themselves aren't even neutral, the ones that they're choosing. And that's the other thing. It's like this clearly, selects a certain political side when you're choosing these topics. And that's another thing that's dangerous. And I'm saying that, trying to be perfectly neutral here. I have my own political views, which are aligned, we'll say, with California's, but like I do want to kind of see both sides of it and how alienating that would be for certain artists to feel like the state is getting involved with what artists and supporting certain artists and not supporting others. Artists need to feel free to have their own topics when they're talking about, and I mean they do, but it would be nice if like the government was just giving grants for everything, for any topic and not trying to promote one or the other. And we've seen some of that here. I mean, one of my artists, Nayana Lafond, who we're exhibiting right now, she exhibited with us in February through March 2023. She focuses on missing and murdered Indigenous people. She's Indigenous herself, and she does portraits of those who are missing, those who have passed away, have been murdered, frankly, and activists as well. She started this project essentially with a single Facebook post, and people now send her these photos. And she does this work to bring awareness to this issue because Indigenous people often feel like a forgotten group, especially here on the East Coast. I think this is often like I've had multiple conversations with people being like, this is a West Coast problem, or this is something that's happening out West. And I said, no, this is happening here too. This awareness helps for people to understand that this is still an ongoing issue, that Indigenous women are at 10 times the risk of experiencing violence in their life as opposed to white women like myself. And this is really important. And we are fundraising for the National Indigenous Women's Resource Center. So we're trying to both bring awareness to the issue through Nayana's work and to fundraise for people or for groups like the NIWRC that actually works to influence legislation. And I think that's the complex part of it as well, being an artivist, is how much can you do with just bringing awareness, right? And so Nayana does this fantastic work. And what's great is that it actually allows her to get on the radio, onto television, and into the newspaper talking about it. So it really is, it's beyond just the people who are coming and seeing the exhibitions, although that's really helped her to get both into the East Coast and now onto the West Coast, where she's a 2 or 3 year tour of her work happening, but also into more mainstream media.
And bringing a lot of awareness with great work, impact, totally something an artist could contribute. But how much of a problem that it would solve just by bringing the awareness, right? Like, I mean, artists are not scientists, are not politicians, are not legislators, are not firefighters. What is the role of art in solving the actual problem?
Well, I think that again, you find people like Nan Golden, who has done her movie with Oscar-winning movie about the problem, the opiate problem. I think that that is an example of again artivism, that's activism, and awareness building, but it gets to the level where it can really make changes, and that we have seen the opiate crisis really, it's at the forefront. Certainly not just because of her, but she's a big part of that. How things like that, like her work. We have an artist who does the same thing, Dominic Esposito. He's the person who put the opiate spoon in front of various drug companies and had a gallerist he was working with was arrested and it, got in the news and everything like that. But he'll go and give speeches in front of the state house with various politicians. And so he's going again that kind of far beyond just what a artist does exhibiting their work within the realm of a gallery. I think both of those artists show that it almost consumes your life, I think. You can call yourself an artivist and maybe like yarn bomb a street lamp or something like that, because that seems to be a thing.
Yeah, we have also those in Spain. I found it quite cute. But
Yeah.
yeah.
That gets more into like the craftivism movement and everything like that. That's something else. You can do that, but I'm just saying like there are a lot of different levels you can define yourself at. But I think that where it's really can move the needle is the more I guess you get involved. And I guess isn't that true for everything though?
There are some artivists, they are first artists. They're artists first. And activism is like a flavor, like a icing on a cake, a cherry. It's something just
Mm.
like a, I wouldn't say a decorative, but it's also a defining element because you call it a cherry cake with a cherry on the cake, right? So it's also like a defining item. But first, you need the cake. So it's like an artist with a political opinion and a strong message. And you have some other people that are mainly activists, especially those climate activists. They do something with art, but then the next thing they do might be with something else, maybe with film. The next thing they do is with another mass disobedience, like the tomato sauce.
I know. Well, I immediately thought of like when you talk about climate activists do something with art, and I'm like, they're gluing themselves to paintings. I wouldn't call them artivists. They do not get that title. They
Well,
they're
well,
not
if
creating.
yeah, but if you search activism in the world of art, you search news, you search impact, you search discussions, they got a lot. So
I would guess that they rank pretty high on Google with that.
they did something right.
That's very true. That's a really interesting point. I would say you're right though that some people are going to privilege craft first and others are going to privilege the message. It's true that you have people who approach it from different angles. I mean, I have an artist, Nedret Andre. I think she does a good job of mixing the two, where her work, going back to the environmentalism, is she's focused on seagrass. Her paintings, though, are these beautiful abstract works where seagrass, in a way, are these lines that just appear in the works. And all of the scenes are these underwater scenes, but the works themselves in a way need her interpretation for people to fully understand what she's doing. But she's out there, with the professors from BU and the scientists from Northeastern, literally like helping to replant seagrass, working with the scientists, learning to then be able to put that information about the seagrass, the algae, the bacteria into her works so that they can have these explanations behind them, so that there's science behind her work. So there are ways to, I would say, mix the two, but it is hard to know, like, where do people come from first? I mean, for her, she was an artist and then kind of found her niche and her passion with this work. And this is clearly how her career has gone. And I think the same for Nayana, that she was an artist and she still makes other work, but this series, she always has about a dozen people who are waiting for their portraits of their loved ones to be made because she won't say no. How can you pick and choose when someone sends in a portrait of someone that they've lost?
Earlier on, you mentioned artists selling in a gallery and being an artivist. So, an artist faces the potential political pressure when going towards artivism, but might also face another pressure coming from the market side. As a gallerist yourself, do you find it easier to sell an artivist work or harder? What are the dynamics in the market?
I would say harder. It's challenging to sell work relating to social impact in general. Yet, that is my passion, and that is what Beacon Gallery really exists to do. We tend to take on works that may not have as much commercial prospect as other exhibitions would, but we believe that the message is important for people to see. But some of them, mix well. You can make work that people want to hang in their homes that's also has artivism behind it, has a message, but not all of it can be.
Being the devil's advocate here, I actually think there are two kind of artivism in the market. The kind that is rebellion for rebellion as a kind of a trend, like rock and roll, like roar, and actually you're not really saying anything that is very controversial. It's like roar, today's a good day. It's almost like that. I mean, I'm exaggerating, but it's like eye candy's a bit spicy. Okay, but then you have other more of a institutional academic with research, with a solid discourse, with a strong opinion and message. They're very different. To qualify as artivists, you have to have a strong message, but not necessarily straightforward in the visual expression of each individual work. So, as an artivist labeling yourself, that could be quite convenient when you put out some more do-sell works. I'm not sure if I'm explaining it right. Therefore, those works carries the token, the symbolic value of produced by an artist. At the same time, it's not so heavy to hang at a collector's home. So in a way, it's the best of both worlds of being marketable and being desirable in the world of institutions.
I think there's a lot there that you're saying. First of all, there's a lot of, let's say, performative art out there that,
The Schraders.
yeah, that wants to take advantage of what people see as work that is activist art. So that would be work that's maybe has a label of like people slap like Black Lives Matter on something and be like, someone's going to want to buy this because it says Black Lives Matter, and with nothing else behind it, let's say, rather than it coming from an artist who's fully engaged in that cause or has a meaning behind why they put that on there. Then you have the idea of people, let's say, making mediocre art and deciding that it means something because they're kind of like coming up with some sort of like social impact, like this means this is about the environment and this, because like they can't figure out what it means otherwise, right? Then you have that I think happens.
Especially when there's a fund, the government says, if you make about desertification,
Right.
then you have a bunch of people coming up with.
These crumpled pieces of canvas on the ground are about desertification. Can I have $5,000, please? Right. And so, like, that can happen too. The academic side of it and the institutional side, that takes a long time. In the US right now, it feels like, at least in the Northeast, very few acquisitions happening, or they're very slow. They're not all going to be for artists who are activists. Usually it's going to be for like one piece, right? So it's one of those things where like you just have to be making your work and know that like once you get those, you'll probably have more people who are willing to buy your work. It can have that balance. I was explaining this at studio visits the other day. It's like until you make a name for yourself, in a way, your work has to stand on its own two legs or four legs or however many legs, or its own one hook, we can say, uh, and speak for itself so that people are going to want to acquire it because it's not going to be your name that they're acquiring. At a certain level, you get to for an artist, they'll start wanting to acquire work based on your name. And that'll be true for artivists and just plain artists alike.
Through the years, coaching artists, working with artists on their art, on their projects, I realized that putting yourself in the shoes of an artivist is a very good exercise that would help them think like an artivist and think with purpose, communicate with message. And it's almost like a good workout. Even later on, this person doesn't want to be an artist. It's a good thing to try to do. I think every artist who is believing that, I have nothing to do with artivism, I'm not an artivist, I don't want to talk about politics. I think everybody should at least take an hour with a pen and a piece of paper and try to just be an artivist for an hour in your career, just to see. Because there are a lot of constraints, a lot of tools, a lot of goals that are very similar to what a conventional artist would want to do.
I think it's an interesting idea because essentially it's just kind of like a creative exercise. Like, think of something that you're passionate about. How would you display, or, what message would you give to the world if you had to do that through your art, right?
Many artists, when they start their art career, they think, I'm going to make beautiful flowers, beautiful figurative lady in the beach, and people is going to love my work. They assume people is going to love my work. Okay? They assume that there is a place somewhere in the art history waiting for them to claim. But this is not the case if you think like an artivist. Because you think, oh my God, the government would want to lock me down. The political party is going to give me pressure. Family and friends going to turn their backs on me. What can I do? I have to use all the resources I could, go against the stream. Even people didn't believe me, I have to believe in myself, and I have to create a space in the market, in art history for me, because currently there's no place because I have such a radical idea. I
Hmm.
think that is the twist.
I think that part of what you've said is cultural to where you are, and part of it is very true. I don't know that artivists in the United States, for example, anticipate or experience that their families are turning their backs on them. I mean, let's say someone wants to write about abortion, though, and you're right. If they come from like a Catholic family or probably, I would guess, a Mormon family, then yes, they're going to have a hard time. But I definitely see what you're saying in terms of people going into something thinking that everyone's going to love them and they have a place to claim at a museum, even. Like, there's a museum show waiting for me in 5 years. That doesn't exist for activists. I mean, I feel like I had this conversation the other day with someone, and with this whole idea of like, he's kind of like, why not me? Why am I not institutional? And I said, well, like, why you? Why would someone want to put like, because the curators have to select the work, right? And it's that whole idea of like trying to flip it on your head, which is essentially what you're doing. And it's like, well, but why you? You know? And imagining that instead of the rose petals, laid out on that path of art in front of you until you can find your pedestal just in that moment in the sun that's waiting for you ahead. Instead, it's just dark and you're going to be experiencing a lot of difficulties on your way, and then it's going to be thorny and difficult and it's going to be a struggle, because that's what it is for all artists, whether you're painting flowers or trying to protest the regime you're currently living under, or talking about abortion or LGBTQIA issues or anything. It's tough. And I think that, yes, trying to help people understand that is definitely worthwhile. So if you're doing that with artists, that's great.
Let's talk about something more practical. Maybe some artists are watching this video thinking, I would like to become an artivist, but do I have to do this? Can I do this? What should I really do, like on the practical side? So I was just thinking, like do's and don'ts. Maybe it's a catchy way to call it. One of the things I think you must do is you must align your identity with what you're trying to preach, if I may call the word preach. So you can't be a meat eater preaching for veganism. You can't be a domestic violent person, promote equality. Like, you just, for who you are, you just can't promote certain things, not because you don't want. It's just simply it wouldn't fit your identity. I'm just using very extreme cases, but I've
Sure.
seen cases that are very subtle, but clearly wouldn't fit.
So don't be a hypocrite. That's what you're saying. I mean, essentially. I mean, and I agree. You can't be hypocritical when you're being an artivist. I do think that a lot of people come to artivism not as almost like a conscious choice, if that makes sense, but more that they are almost compelled by the way that they live their lives and the message that they want to get out there.
What about if an artivist is having too strong opinions that feels like preaching, and the audience might feel very like a bit repelled or uncomfortable? How do you avoid being too preachy? Can you give an example?
I think it's hard to give an example off the top of my head, but just for instance, if you're doing an exhibition that is for everyone and it's about the environment, not having your artist statement be too scientific and using words and getting into like the nitty gritty of the science, and remembering who your audience is. That it's not going to be only the people who are diehard environmentalists or diehard scientists, but it's a vast audience who needs to know the basics. It needs to kind of like have that universal appeal.
What about if exhibition's title is "Just Stop Oil," which is a slogan used by many environmental activists? Would it be too much?
No, I mean, I'm not saying that like there's anything that's like too edgy and
Radical.
like or radical. Like things can be as edgy and radical as like whatever space wants to put them out there. That's not really the question. You don't want to get into maybe like the number of barrels of crude oil that are pumped from Saudi Arabia on a monthly basis per capita or something like that. Like that's like you don't need to get into like the nitty-gritty of those sorts of things. You want to give people like the big picture and give like simple things that they can do as opposed to you don't want people to feel like they're being talked down to. They don't like that. That's the thing. Like that's kind of like the preachiness that needs to be avoided, in my opinion.
And, and then how an artist could market, although maybe market is not the best word because maybe when you are preaching already a very radical political idea in art, you don't want to be at the same time very like, market oriented. But let's say how an artist should market him or herself best to avoid repelling people.
I think one thing to understand is that you're not always going to be loved, that there are always people, let's say, particularly on the internet and trolls, there are always going to be trolls. There are always going to be people who are going to say nasty things to you, and it just can't be avoided. Try not to take that to heart and try to focus on the positive rather than the negative. I think for marketing, it's just a question of doing the work. And that means preparing all your documents, such as CV, bio, artist statements, like making all the work, photographing all the work, all those things that you do if it was just a traditional, if you're a regular artist as well, and getting yourself out there, but then also looking and trying to engage with the communities that already exist that are passionate about these causes. That's the one benefit to this. It's like if you are as we used as for the example, just painting flowers, yeah, maybe you can get involved with some like horticultural groups or something like that. So maybe there's a group for everyone. But if you are looking to get involved with like Just Stop Oil and groups that are against all the big petrol companies, then there are probably some hashtags that you should be using every single time you post online. And there's some probably Reddit subgroups that you should be reading and potentially posting on. Not everyone is looking to have a shameless self promoter involved all the time. So it's not about that, but it's about creating authentic connections. And the problem is that people can spot someone who's not authentic from like a mile away. So if you aren't passionate about your cause and you're just doing this to try to sell work, don't bother. You have to really be passionate about whatever cause you are going to be an activist for.
But do you have any of the no-nos if you were to choose an artist, like some certain beliefs or certain things? For example, if someone who is very political, just about artworks or imageries about certain political figures, would you, as a commercial gallery yourself, would you take in artists who are like just political? Because I know there's some galleries that wouldn't want.
Yes, we do. I'm pretty independent minded, started my own gallery and continue to run my own gallery. For instance, we have an artist, Diana Weimar, who founded the Tiny Pricks project, I believe back in 2016, which has been cataloging the presidency and now post presidency of Donald Trump in embroidery on vintage fabric. This is an ongoing project. It's a community based project. So people have, it's mostly on Instagram at, if you look up at Tiny Pricks, you'll find it. It's ongoing and has over 6,000 pieces now. And it's really expanded to include so many different themes, but it feels like a memorial to our times. Honestly, it is political. And I'm sure there are some people who came in and were like, what the heck is this? And we're going to be exhibiting her work again in September through November of 2024, right before the election, on the gamble that Donald Trump or someone Trump like will be running. we don't have a theme yet because we're literally waiting to see how things go, but it will be political. And she is a, I guess, more of a craftivist because it is embroidery as opposed to one of the quote unquote fine arts. And we'll likely have a book out by then as well. Knock on wood, that's what something that she's been working on. The work is amazing, and having someone who's giving that outlet to a community as well. And I think that's something that we haven't really gotten into at all, is kind of like when this comes from, starts as a singular mission based, like one person activity, and like how can it expand to include others as well. The community side of it and what it's, I think, allowed other people to do and how it's brought people together has been fascinating.
You mentioned there's a book that she's working on right now, and it might be published next year. That's exciting. And I assumed that maybe it's not true, but I assumed that artists that although their primary medium is painting or another like video or embroidery, they're not as much distanced as other artists from writing. Because I think if your art is about having the message out there, then you would use all means possible to get your message out there. You would sing it, you would dance it, you would yell it out loud, right? So writing is a part of getting the message out. But many other artists would like say, no, 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 I'm not a writer. I'm a painter. I will not write a word. People will have to get it from my art. What do you see? Should artivists write?
I would say that if they can, they should be using every medium possible to them that they're capable of using. And so that goes for writing, public speaking, yes, like you said, dancing, dance your message. But I think it is again that question of like what takes away from your primary work and the art, and how do you balance it? I think that that's the key, is trying to find that balance of how you get your message out there. And I think that when the message is at the heart of what you're doing, rather than the art being at the heart of it, that it's the art is just a means to an end, then it allows you to look at all the tools at your disposal and be much more balanced about that. I think that when the art is the primary and at the foundation of everything, because you're primarily an artist and you're using the artivism to promote your art career, it gets more complicated because you have more of like this focus on it's the art. It's more focused, and you're going to use probably just this one medium. And that's almost like a different form of artivism, maybe.
Yeah, that's why I said, are the artivists, they're artists first or they're activists first?
Yeah.
That's basically what I was trying to
Yeah,
describe.
absolutely. And I think we already, yeah, so I guess we already went over that, but it's true.
I would assume in the future, artivism will be more relevant because we are coming to a very special time, a pivoting moment with technology most advanced than ever before and resources more limited. And there is the war and multiple wars likely to break out. And with all this climate crisis, what do you think about the role of artivism in the next decade?
Yes, I think that artivism will continue to play a significant role. I think that just in terms of what we've seen on a much longer time horizon, for about the past 50 years, art has really put on a pedestal abstraction. And that kind of modern art and abstraction has really been the number one thing. And I think that is slowly changing, in my opinion at least, and shifting over to something else. The figure is coming back in. art with a more of a message behind it rather than the art for art's sake and the gesture will take its place. This is where the world is going. I think people are looking for meaning and they're looking for direction. And if art is one of the places that can help them find that, then all the better.
But would they find meaning in art?
I think more so in the activism side of it than the art of it, if that makes sense. But it's like bringing those two things together. What people are often looking for is an experience. That's what I find, even when they come into the gallery. I think the more that they come in and it feels like an experience rather than just looking at something on the wall. So if there's like a meaning behind it, if there's something to learn, if there's a way to engage, or however you want to make it an experience, it doesn't necessarily have to be activism. There are lots of ways to engage people. I think that like Super Blue in Miami has turned art into an immersive experience, and people love that too. So it doesn't have to be just this way of making an experience, but any way in which people can more fully engage in art as opposed to just standing in front of a picture is probably the direction that things are going. It's just that people are ready, I think, for something different now, and which is normal. We tend to work in cyclical ways. And eventually the old will become new again. And we'll go back likely to wanting the calm abstractions of the past. And it'll be like, we're just looking for a rest. Everything is ads and images and messages everywhere. I want to go into a gallery and just want a calm space, but that'll probably be in another 50 years. It's all cyclical and it's all about what people want now. And I think that we're kind of moving out of one time period and are into this next of experience.
I do want to do lastly a piece of fortune telling. I believe that in the next decade, within artivism or outside intersex artivism, there should be a new trend of non-fictional art. I don't know how I describe it. You can call it realism, but um,
Photography, perhaps?
no.
I'm kind of teasing you.
Yeah, okay, okay. Because, I was thinking that today the machine learning can produce every kind of fake news, right? Can
Oh,
produce
yeah.
talking heads, deep fake, not so deep, but still fake, all of that. So authenticity of real human experience and real human story would be much more intriguing, precious, and in a way would stand out.
Mm.
Just like when all these strawberries are like GMO strawberries, doesn't taste like anything. When you actually go pick a wild, true strawberry, put in your mouth, it's a different experience. Although the strawberry had never changed, the human stories had been like this, and there are different. There are fiction, there's non-fiction throughout different media in different history period. But I think today it will be the non-fiction. That's what I think. And artivism can be based on nonfiction, like your true, authentic story, and you tell about it in the form of art with a message.
Yeah, I think that having that dividing line between AI and human made artwork will be more well defined in the future. You're absolutely right. Um, as people do try to kind of submit that work or have consider themselves artists with that will become a danger even in artivism and activism most likely. And I think we're about to see a glut of content coming our way in probably all fields. I mean, they had a science fiction magazine that had to stop getting submissions because they went from, I think, 70 submissions a month to like 700 submissions a month, and they were all AI created. So, because it was so easy now, they didn't have to create the work themselves.
It's so easy to create fiction, but still to create a true human life experience of someone, you have to live it. So you have to embody the figure you wish to project as an artist. Therefore, it means you must suffer.
Unfortunately, I mean, that goes back to what we were saying in the introduction, was that there is this level, I think, unfortunately, of suffering that all of this probably stems from. Like, you don't end up being an artivist because you've lived like a perfect life, you know?
You have to suffer.
Yeah, mate. We have to make sure we're not gatekeeping though. So that's the key, is that anyone is allowed to do these things. I think it's just, for me, it's a question of like what inspires us. And I don't know if there's anyone out there who hasn't had the unfortunately inspirational events in their life, we'll say. So we've all had our moments of suffering, large or small, that we can turn into art. On that note,
On that note.
let's go return to the real world where we'll suffer some more, right?
So every time you go through a hardship, you go collect that experience, save it for my artivism projects.
Whenever I have a bad experience, I go, this is going to make a great story at a cocktail party. So that's what I tell myself.
Yeah.
So there you go. Thank you so much. This was so fun.
Yeah, thanks for listening to our conversation. If you like this video, make sure you click like and share your experience in the comment below. So that's all for today, and see you in the next video.
Thank you. Bye.
Bye.